Hindu-Muslim unity and reconciliation is getting delayed once again. When did it start and when did it happen for the first time? At around 1875, Hindu and Muslim society was kind of united. They were united in their hatred for the British. The British were force-feeding Hindus beef. They were force-feeding Muslims pork through many excuses. And as we know that led to the revolt of 1857. And after the revolt ended, the British used their Indian police officers and Indian people who were in the British army to kill many people, and again as punishment to again force feed beef to Hindus and pork to Muslims. These united the British oppression of Indians secularly, regardless of their religion. This led to a general cohesion, integrity and friendship and unity among Hindus and Muslims. Sir Syed Ahmed Khan, the founder of Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College and Aligarh Muslim University, he comes up with this idea that we don't need this social cohesion, cultural integrity nonsense. He was afraid that the distinct, brutal and intolerant character of Muslims, which stems from their idea of not using akal and instead doing nakal of whatever occurred in Arabia during the beginning of Islam, that fundamental character was getting lost. Muslims were becoming too Indianized in his opinion. So he creates the Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College to make sure Muslims get hired in large numbers in British administrative offices, just like Hindus, while keeping the so-called Muslim Islamic identity intact. He didn't want Muslims to avoid studying science for the sake of religion, which is why he is called a reformer in Islam, and he kind of is. He is saying that reforming can happen and you can study science, but just don't forget what your end goals are. Let's quote some of Sir Syed Ahmed Khan's opinions. Sir Syed Ahmed Khan said in an 1883 speech in Patna, "Friends, in India there live two prominent nations which are distinguished by the names of Hindus and Muslimans. Just as a man has some principal organs, similarly these two nations are like the principal limbs of India." He says in 1887 that, now suppose that all the English were to leave India, then who would be rulers of India? Is it possible that under these circumstances two nations, Mohammedan and Hindu, could sit on the same throne and remain equal in power? Most certainly not. It is necessary that one of them should conquer the other and thrust it down. To hope that both could remain equal is to desire the impossible and inconceivable. And thus begins the two-nation theory, which people blame Savarkar for, but as we can see, Sir Syed Ahmed did it before Savarkar was born. So, such a person decides to open the Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College with the claim that they can't live peacefully and one has to conquer the other and thrust one down. In other words, he extrapolates what he views Islam to be on Hindus as well. Now, therefore, Sir Syed Ahmed Khan takes the inspiration from Thomas Babington Macaulay to create a brown Islamist Sahib. So what is the brown Sahib concept created by Macaulay? As many of you all know, he has an infamous minute, a declaration, a speech, where he said that we must at present do our best to form a class who may be interpreters between us and the millions whom we govern, a class of persons, Indians in blood and color, but English in tastes, in opinions, in morals and in intellect. So, interpreting this in his own way, Sir Syed Ahmed Khan wanted Islamist Sahibs. He wanted a brown Sahib who will talk and dress like the British, but in mind he will keep planning to do everything Muhammad did in Arabia. What do I mean by that? Along with killing countless men, women and children in pre-Islamic pagan Arabia, Muhammad carried out destruction of pagan temples like that of Ruda, Dhul Khulasa, Faraz, Al-Jahina, Uzra, Anas, Fils, Banu Sulaim, the temples of goddesses like Al-Manat, Al-Lat, Al-Uzza, who are said to have escaped to Somnath temple. The folklore was that not Al-Uzra but Al-Lat and Al-Manat, they escaped to Somnath temple because the pre-Islamic pagans and polytheists and idol worshippers of Arabia, they really had love and respect for Somnath temple because they used to do trade with Bharat. So when temples of Al-Manat and Al-Lat were getting destroyed all over Arabia, they created this folklore among them that they must be now safe in Somnath temple, which is why that created the obsession of Islamic invaders later to repeatedly demolish and destroy Somnath temple because they wanted the gold, plus they were pissed off that Allah and Al-Manat are hiding inside the temple. Now, then there was the destruction of the Christian church of Yamama, temples of the pagan tribes of Banu Sad and Bin Bakar, temples around Taif, Dhul al-Kafain, Suwa, Mecca, Kaaba. He also asked a so-called sacred tree worshipped by some pagan tribes to be destroyed. He even destroyed the Masjid al-Dirar, also known as the Mosque of Opposition, because that mosque had decided that Islam was great, we love Allah, but they rejected the authority of Muhammad. So basically, he didn't want Muslims to be Sir Syed Ahmed Khan didn't want Muslims to be too Indianized like other invaders of the past, like Kushans or Indo-Greeks. For example, Kushans were outsiders who came to India, invaded and embraced Indian culture, dharmic culture. So were Indo-Greeks. And what's my proof for saying that? Because you don't know anyone who is a Kushan descendant. Can you tell which of your friends are Kushan or who is Indo-Greek? For all we know, Hrithik Roshan might be Indo-Greek. But we don't know who they were because they integrated and loved and respected this culture. And they all got mingled up. But we know who the Muslims are because they wanted to keep their distinct past and distinctness intact. They didn't want to integrate with India. Then there are examples of peaceful immigrants like Jews and Parsis, whom we know who are them, but they have never had any problem with Hindus and Sanatan Dharmis. Now, Syed Ahmed wanted the Arabian, Persian, Turkic thoughts to remain intact. He didn't want them to forget their end goal, which is convert Darul Harb to Darul Islam. Now, what is Darul Harb? Darul Harb is a house of war, which implies two things according to Brown University Islamic Archaeology Glossary of 2007. One, generally it refers to any place that Islam cannot be practiced without persecution. Now, by this definition, Bharat is not Darul Harb and has never been, because no one has persecuted Muslims for practicing Islam. But the second point is, it also refers to a country that is not under Islamic rule, and therefore Bharat is Dar al-Harb, which either needs to be turned into Dar al-Islam or pieces of its land needs to be taken away to set up Dar al-Islam, like the case of Pakistan. So anyway, then the Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College becomes Aligarh Muslim University in 1920 and delays Hindu-Muslim reconciliation by 147 years. One of the founding members of Aligarh Muslim University is Muhammad Ali Jauhar. Now, who is Jauhar? Here are some of his quotes. However pure Mahatma Gandhi's character may be, he must appear to me from the point of religion inferior to any Musalman, even though he be without character. This is said in 1924. In 1925 he says, yes, according to my religion and creed, I do hold an adulterous and a fallen Musalman to be better than Mr. Gandhi. In this context, let's also check out what Sufi poet Khwaja Hasan Nizami says in 1928. I'm mentioning this only because it's the same timeline, similar people are talking up. So Khwaja Hasan Nizami says, Musalmans are separate from Hindus. They cannot unite with the Hindus. After bloody wars, the Musalmans conquered India and the English took India from them. The Musalmans are one united nation and they alone will be the masters of India. They will never give up their individuality. They have ruled India for hundreds of years and hence they have a prescriptive right over the country. The Hindus are a minor community in the world. They are never free from internecine quarrels. They believe in Gandhi and the worship of cow. They are polluted by taking other people's water. The Hindus do not care for self-government. They have no time to spare for it. Let them go on with their internal squabbles. What capacity have they for ruling over men? The Musalmans did rule and the Musalmans will rule. Okay, that's just a side topic. So, Muhammad Ali Jauhar, he is one of the founding members of Aligarh Muslim University. Muhammad Ali Jauhar also says to consider one's creed as superior to that of every non-Muslim is the duty of a Musliman. He said this in a letter to the magazine called Tej. This was quoted by Arun Shori in his book called The World of Fatwas or the Sharia in Action in 2012, published by HarperCollins. Now, under the leadership of the same Muhammad Ali Jauhar, Professor Muhammad Habib, father of the famous Professor Irfan Habib, starts a group called Aligarh School and sets out to whitewash the crimes of Islamist invaders against dharmic sampradayas. His main focus was to counter this narrative which had become accepted that Islamic invasions were barbaric for non-Muslims. This narrative got popularized because of mainly two books. One, the 12-volume compilation called The History of India as Told by Its Own Historians, written by H.M. Eliot and John Dawson. And the second book is History of Aurangzeb by our own legend Acharya Jadunath Sarkar. So the narrative in public life and public morality became and effectively concluded was that Islam has a barbaric past. This sentiment was also the consistent position of some of the greatest philosophers in the history of mankind, like Swami Dayanand Saraswati, Swami Vivekanand, Sri Aurobindo Ghosh, Rabindranath Thakur, etc. Here's what they say about Islam. Swami Dayanand writes in the 14th chapter of his book Satyarth Prakash, or The Light of Meaning of the Truth. He that does not believe in the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad is an infidel. He should therefore be put to death. Since the Quran sanctions such cruelty to non-Muhammadans and innocent creatures such as cows, it can never be the word of God. Swami Vivekananda says, everything beyond that means Islam, not only is bad but must be destroyed forthwith. At a moment's notice, every man or woman who does not exactly believe in that must be killed. Everything that does not belong to this worship must be immediately broken. Every book that teaches anything else must be burned. From the Pacific to the Atlantic, for 500 years, blood ran all over the world. That is Mohammedanism. Aurobindo writes in 1934, as for the Hindu-Muslim affair, I saw no reason why the greatness of India's past or her spirituality should be thrown into waste paper basket in order to conciliate the Muslims who would not at all be conciliated by such policy. Aurobindo Ghosh writes in 4th September 1909 that every action, for instance, which may be objectionable to a number of Mohammedans is now liable to be forbidden because it is likely to lead to a breach of the peace, and one is dimly beginning to wonder whether the day may not come when worship in Hindu temples may be forbidden on that valid ground. Listen to such strong words of against appeasement. Rabindranath Tagore writes in his original works of Rabindranath, volume 24, page 375, published by Vishwabharati in 1982. There are two religions in earth which have distinct enmity against all other religions. These two are Christianity and Islam. They are not just satisfied with observing their own religions, but are determined to destroy all other religions. Retired IAS officer, popular political commentator Sanjay Dikshit writes on page 35 of his book Unbreaking India that even Muslims were reconciled to this position taken by Hindus because they were well aware of the atrocities suffered by Hindus. Now, Muhammad Habib and later his son Professor Irfan Habib took it upon themselves to declare that even if there was any Islamic barbarity, it was because of economic reasons and not theology. The classic argument of brown sahibs, right from Mahatma Gandhi to Barkhadat, that anytime Muslims commit genocide of Hindus, it's because it was a group of poor Muslims revolting against rich Hindu Brahmins. Author Sandeep Balakrishna describes this phenomenon beautifully in his 2018 book, 70 Years of Secularism. Let's see what Balakrishna had said. After much thought, Muhammad Habib and company discovered an effective method, tactic is the apt word, to sanitize the savage record of the Muslim rule in India. This method was to interpret the medieval Muslim chronicles in such a way that Islam's image could be rescued from the pit it had fallen into. Accordingly, the blood-soaked record of the medieval Muslim rule in India was systematically recast in economic terms. Muhammad Habib was immensely helped by the deceptive theoretical framework of Marxism in this vile project. Working nearly in tandem, the history departments at Aligarh and Allahabad universities created and floated this new phony hot air balloon, as we can verify today, had long-term and far-reaching consequences in defacing and distorting the collective psyches of at least three generations of Hindus. Some fumes emitted by this noxious hot air balloon include the following. 1. Islamic invasion of India was a myth. 2. Muslim invaders were not motivated by Islam in their conquest of India. 3. Forcible conversions of Hindus were a bigger myth because millions of low-caste Hindus voluntarily, joyfully accepted the universal brotherhood of Islam to escape Brahminical oppression, which is a complete lie because poor Hindus converted because they couldn't afford to pay jizya. 4. Islam was a liberating force which for the first time introduced true social equality in India, as a result of which lakhs of Hindus voluntarily helped build magnificent mosques and palaces for Muslim sultans. This social equality is also wrong because 10% of Indian Muslims are ashrafs who oppress in every way the rest of the indigenous Indian Muslims who converted because of fear or because they had to pay jizya and who are called pasmandas or ajlafs. Number 5. Aurangzeb's vast empire of Islamic bigotry imploded due to a revenue crisis and not because of his industrial scale oppression of Hindus. Remember, at a point in the pre-partition era, Hindus and Muslims were attending any call of freedom movements that were being made by Netaji or Gandhi. Whenever they made any call for freedom movement, Hindus and Muslims unitedly went there. Remember how patriotic Afghani Muslims were who didn't want partition. Remember legendary freedom fighter Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, who was also popularly known as Sarhadi Gandhi because of his closeness with Mahatma Gandhi, because of his close friendship with Gandhi. And he spent his entire life fighting the British for a free and united India. He said to Gandhi and Congress, feeling betrayed because of their consent to the partition, and wrote that, "You have thrown us to the wolves." And then he spent the rest of his life in house arrest in Pakistan until the age of 97. In conclusion, as a result of appeasement by a small number of Hindus and anti-integration moves by a small number of Muslims and communists, Hindu-Muslim unity and reconciliation that was on the verge of becoming a reality got delayed. Then, decades pass, and a slightly Indic values inclined political party comes to power in 2014, which leads to a fresh era of conversations and debates regarding the nature of Islamic violence on non-Muslims in Bharat. Gradually, the voices of truly secular Muslims start becoming popular. For example, General Syed Atta Hasnain, Governor Arif Muhammad Khan, Pasmanda rights activist Dr. Faiz Ahmad Faizi, author Tariq Fatah, and other social media commentators like Dr. Syed Rizwan Ahmed, Khalid Umar, Russell Rahim, Jahid Hussain, Amna Ansari Begum, Khalid Beg, Ahmed Sharif, Subuhi Khan, and many others. Some such Muslims even start declaring themselves to be Sanatani Muslims. Countless ex-Muslims too join in the contributing towards this potential reconciliation. Proof of this reconciliation lies in the fact that when a shivling is found in a mosque built after destroying a temple, the barrage of crass humor about shivlings comes disproportionately more from Hindus, legally speaking Hindus, than Muslims. It was the usual suspect Brown Sahib Hindus, the ideological children of Macaulay again. The fact that this phase of mockery was not carried out majorly by Muslims points out to the fact, in my opinion, that they had yet again started seeing the truth and understanding the reality of Islamic barbarity in Bharat. And then, it all falls apart on 5th June 2022. Spokeswoman of the largest political party in the world gets suspended for referring to Sahih al-Bukhari 5134 in a rude tone while making the argument that what if Hindus make fun of Islam the same way others are making fun of the shivling inside a mosque? Brown Sahib Hindus and Muslims from all over the world condemn it in strong words. Some call for her arrest, some declare monetary prizes for beheading her, some threaten to rape her. The popular slogan in this context is "Gustakh Rasool ki ek hi saza, sar tan se juda," meaning beheading a blasphemer is the only punishment. Everyone who either did not protest the mocking of shivlings or actively took part in it came out in protests against Nupur Sharma. For example, Brown Sahib MPs like Derek O'Brien and Moha Moitra, and thousands others, and thus carrying forward the baton of appeasement by Hindus and communists on one hand, and the anti-integration speeches of Muslims on the other. The message becomes clear that street rioters and potential murderers have the moral support to take out any action if they decide on their own that a particular point of view is blasphemy. It doesn't matter that no one has corrected Nupur Sharma. No one is saying what you said is wrong. No one is saying that you misquoted it or misinterpreted it. Everyone's argument is she should not have said it. Like in the case of Kashmir Files. In my opinion, this action by the biggest political party in the world has emboldened and resown seeds of Islamic barbarism and has given the message to the secular Muslims that I mentioned earlier that your voices are not important and that voices of barbaric Muslims is what will be listened to. Now would be a good time to mention that it's time to demand true free speech without any room for blasphemy laws or the so-called hurting religious sentiments. The best counter to bad speech is more speech. Anyone you think is hurting your sentiments, you have the right to hurt his sentiments. Blasphemy laws cannot exist in a civilized and secular nation that claims to have law and order under control. Besides, if a comment is actually crass or ugly, it only exposes the person saying the words. Unless damage control immediately starts on every level to keep up the reconciliation procedures, the upliftment, the conversations over the history of Islamic barbarity and the upliftment of the secular and sane voices from among the Muslims, we are about to see another few decades of Hindu-Muslim quarrels that may again lead to violence in the coming days. So in conclusion, Notice how all this has happened before. Notice how history is repeating itself. Notice how similar figures of appeasement and anti-integration exist today. We have many Sir Syed Ahmeds and Muhammad Habibs now. We have the same leftist brown sahibs. And we have a Gandhi Nehru in the top leadership running the country.